The Evergreen Show, taking your business from seed to sapling to towering giant. With your hosts, best-selling author and business growth experts Noah Fleming and Shawn Veltman. This is the only show that gives you proven, pragmatic, and immediately applicable business growth strategies every week in 15 minutes or less. Here's Noah and Shawn.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Evergreen Show. This is Noah Fleming with my co-host, Chief Surgeon, Dr. Shawn Veltman. Shawn, how are you doing today?
If I was any better, I'd be twins.
I don't know what I'd do with two of you around. That'd be getting a little crazy. So listen up. Episode 42. Oh, wait, no, let me get this right. Yes, episode 42. We're talking about a pretty touchy subject today. Do you know what we're talking about?
Oh, I do know what we're talking about.
So if you're a salesperson, a sales guy, a sales gal, you might want to plug your ears for this one. This is one we're going to talk about: when to fire your salesperson, when to fire a salesperson, a sales guy, a sales gal, when to fire your whole sales team, but when to fire a salesperson. And I think, as I said, you might want to close your ears for this one. But this is one that Shawn and I deal with on a regular basis because we're often working with companies with teams of sales folks. We're working with sales managers. We're working with presidents of organizations, CEOs, just about everybody else that's dealing with salespeople. And sometimes the unfortunate event comes up that somebody has to be let go. So we're going to talk about when to do that, the reasons why to do that, and how to do it. Sound good?
That sounds good.
So I guess, the first thing that comes to mind is when to do it. I mean, when and how and why do you learn that it's time to fire a salesperson? I think, obviously, there's some pretty common themes and common threads. First of all, is an unperforming salesperson. I have a colleague of mine who runs a very large sales division for a very large company. Now, they do telemarketing-based sales, so it's very cut and dry. Either you've got it or you don't. And so they move very quickly. There's a lot of churn and burn. But for other companies, more established, not necessarily more established, but companies with more of a presence, more of a history, more of a, person-to-person relationship where people got to get out on the ground, it becomes a little bit harder to do. So, Shawn, in your opinion, what are some of the things we need to be on the lookout for as it comes to our salespeople? What are some of the things we need to be measuring? Again, there's some pretty common stuff, but I think you and I have some interesting takes on what we think needs to be measured and some of the benchmarks, or at least the goalposts that we want our salespeople to be hitting. So I'll let you take a little stab at this, and then I'll jump back in.
Sounds good. So first, I want to preface my discussion with, at the end of the day, everything with sales measurement comes down to performance, right? So if you do have that number, that sales number, that quota, whatever, and your people are hitting it out of the park, nothing before that matters, right? So if you say we want all of our salespeople to be out and we want them doing 6 site visits a day and we want them to be doing 10 calls a day, and Jim's only going out once a day and he's only making 1 call a day, but he's hitting 5 times his quota, well, maybe you want to cut back everybody else. Tell them, you do what Jim does, because he seems to be doing it right. So any metric we have in place is subservient to sales. The problem that most companies face and the challenge that most run into is it can be hard to figure out what that number is, especially in the first year of a new salesperson's tenure. Or you might come in and find, our company has a 4 to 6 month sales cycle. So all of a sudden there, you've got 4 to 6 months before you can expect a sale from a new person. How do you know if they're any good in that first 4 to 6 months? And that, I think, is what we're really driving at, and what we're going to focus on today is understanding early on what are the positive signs or what are the warning signs, and how many of those warning signs have to come up before you're willing to say goodbye to a new salesperson.
So, this brings me back to, I'm trying to think what the episode was. I'm looking here at our files. But something that you and I say often is, you can't expect what you don't inspect. And so much of the time, even in billion-dollar organizations that I've worked with, doing $1 billion in revenue every year consistently for, 20 plus years, sometimes what we find, or at least what I find, is they don't even have the basics of measurement in place. And so they are only looking at one sort of specific metric, like, cash year over year or revenue year over year and how many deals and what their quotas are. But they're not inspecting the other more important things. And so everything does come down to, did that person generate enough revenue? But there's other things we need to be tracking. So you gave a few examples there, like the activity components, site visits, calls, emails. And that's why one of the things that we always recommend getting in place very early on are these expectations of activity, these expectations of what people need to be doing on a regular basis to ensure that we get the compliance and at least the activity levels we expect. Now, again, one of the challenges is when you have a $1 billion company that has succeeded to that extent for let's say 30 plus years, they're privately held. One of the challenges is bringing those things into place and saying, okay, now we're going to expect you to do something that you haven't had to do for the past 20 or 30 years. And we're going to measure that. And your results and perhaps even your job are going to be reliant on you meeting those expectations. And as well as I do, we get a lot of pushback when we implement something like that, especially when there hasn't been that type of measurement in the first place. But why is it important? I mean, why do we even have to worry about stuff like that if they are a $1 billion organization, if they are hitting their sales numbers, if they are hitting their quotas? Hi, Wishes.
My little dog, she's got a new friend as a neighbor and is very excited to tell the world about it.
So I guess, that's sort of my question here is, why is it even important? Why do we need to bring this into play? If it's something that we haven't done in the past, our salespeople are hitting their quotas, we're still doing $1 billion in revenue every year, why? What's the point?
Sure. And, you and I both know that the answer to this is that $1 billion is coming from your sales force. And your sales force has to hit a certain amount to keep that number coming in. Now, if everybody's looking at it and saying, hey, the company makes $1 billion, they can afford to pay me. Well, you're not getting your money's worth in the long and short of it. That they could probably do the same with half the size of the team with people who were hitting their numbers. And so, and most companies know this, right? They look at it on a department by department basis. And even within a sales team, they look at it in territory. And everybody knows who the superstars are. Everybody knows who the laggards are. Sometimes clarifying the numbers and the expectations is eye-opening to see why people are doing better, or to see that somebody is just so naturally talented that they're doing better even though they're not hitting everything else. But ultimately, what every company wants to be able to do is to say, all right, so long as you make me X dollars, then I'm happy. And anything more than that is gravy, and you're going to get a higher commission on it, and we're going to make more from it. But you have to hit X, because if you don't hit X, you're actually costing me money. And what we find is that a lot of companies know what X is, but they don't really know how to measure whether or not their salespeople are on track to hit that. So they have to wait until the end of the quarter, the end of the half, the end of the year, in order to see what the actual results were. Which means that you're giving bad salespeople a free year. I don't know what your base is in your company. And a lot of them, we see the base is quite high for the worst salespeople. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, so you bring up a couple good points there, and I think one of the things that comes to mind is especially in some larger established organizations where there are quotas and people are hitting them and they're still doing insane amounts of revenue. There are some people that can coast. And, sales in particular is one of the biggest areas of any business where you can't coast. And so you need people that are going to be out there doing what you need to do. It's not just a matter of generating more revenue. It's a matter of retention and maintaining relationships with customers and clients and building that repeat business. And so again, if we're allowing our salespeople to coast, if we're allowing them to do these sorts of things without any measurement on our end, then we are missing an opportunity. So it's not to say $1 billion and revenue couldn't be 1.2, whatever it is. It's important that we start to recognize that these are the types of things that we need to be watching for, because this is one of the signposts that a salesperson might need to go, in that they're kind of just sitting around all day. They're not really doing what you need them to do. They're hitting the golf course, I mean, regularly. And there's certainly business to be done on the golf course. But you know what I mean? It's important to be measuring these types of things, especially in terms of what sort of activity do we expect, and what are the consequences for not meeting that level of activity.
Absolutely. One of the things that we do a lot with companies is just start getting concrete at the different stages of the sales process. Right? So working backwards, and we say, okay, you need each salesperson to bring in $10 million of revenue per year. So to do that, what do you need? Well, your average deal size is $500,000 a year, so you need 20 deals a year. Okay, to get 20 deals a year, how many quotes do you need to send out? Well, you typically have a 50% acceptance rate. So you need to send out 40 quotes to get those 20 deals. So what work needs to go into 40 quotes? And you can work this all the way back to how many new prospect calls have to go out, how many existing client calls have to go out to generate repeat business, how many referral requests need to go out, or you can figure out the math of just hitting expectation to find your minimums and to find the activity level. And often what we find is that everything works from the sale backwards. And what I mean by that is, if you've got somebody who hit 150% of their number last year, you don't have to spend too much time working with them or worrying about what they're doing. Right? They've done well. They're continuing to do well. If everything looks the same, then you don't have to worry too much about them. But if somebody came under their number, then you start to look at the next number. So, if they only did 8 million in sales, look at how many quotes they put out. Did they put out 20 or 30 quotes or 40 quotes? Or did they only put out 15 or 20? Right? If they put out the right number of quotes but didn't get it, then you immediately can start looking at the quality of the quote and compare that to the person who put out the same number but got double the revenue. So you can immediately start to find the points where things are failing. And more often than not, there's not a lot of mystery here. Right? More often than not, when people aren't hitting their numbers, you can trace that all the way back to lack of activity or lack of the right activity.
So, we started here talking about when to know you should fire a salesperson, how to do it, why you might do it. So we've talked about a few of those reasons. One of the things I wanted to discuss is, how do we actually do it? How do we actually determine that this person needs to go? And, what's the recourse here, especially if we're a smaller company, where we've only got a number of people, they're managing accounts. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oddly enough, I do.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, who'd have thunk it? So my thoughts on there are pretty simple. We've talked before about, called the $1 million test or the gun to the head test, which is, could somebody do it if their life depended on it? If they couldn't, then it's a skills issue. If they could, it's an attitude issue, right? All of our loyal listeners remember that wonderful podcast. But we see this so often in sales, where often there's nothing new that people have to get. It's not a new skill they have to develop. It's just the consistency and the discipline to go do it. So, we've seen a lot of salespeople who haven't hit the numbers that we want them to in terms of activity. Maybe they're not making enough calls a day. They're not, doing enough face-to-face client visits a day. They're not doing enough prospecting or research on new clients. And when we talk to them, we get typically one of two responses. Response one is, you're absolutely right. I haven't been doing that. I haven't been keeping up. My plan for the next month is to increase those numbers here, and here's how I'm going to find the time to do that. Response two is, I think I'm doing fine. Let's wait till the end of the year and see how it shakes out. I got a good feeling about a few of these deals, so don't worry about it. Everything's in play. The first answer is the right one. Right? The first answer is taking responsibility and accountability. The first answer is looking at the activity metrics and them telling us how those are going to be tweaked. The second is feeding a story and hoping that we buy it.
Yeah, those are super interesting. So, listen, we're coming up on the 14-minute Mark here. I want to get down to the challenge. I hope we've covered this topic enough. I know it's something we'll cover in greater detail for all those sales folks out there that have plugged their ears. I would suggest that these are things that we can bring forward. And as salespeople, we can bring forward and give management some insight on the types of things that they should be measuring. So if you are a rock star salesperson, share some of what you're doing on a regular basis with those that might not be hitting their numbers, those that might be struggling. Let them know some of the best practices that you bring to the organization, whether it's, again, site visits, number of calls, number of emails, number of people you see, and perhaps a lot of it has to do with tenure and how much time you've been at the company. But these are the types of things we need to be looking at. These are the types of ways we can get better. Sales is changing dramatically with the increase in things like artificial intelligence and automation and big data. And so for us to remain relevant, one of the most important things we need to be doing is our activity with new clients, existing clients, and everything else in between. So Shawn, that's my little rant on that. Do you got a challenge for us today?
So my challenge is this, everybody listening has either right now or in the past known that there's a salesperson in their organization or working around them that needs to go. And so based on the discussion that we've had today, you've probably got some additional ideas or some new ideas on ways that you can quantify that, right? Start looking at activity, start going backwards from the sale to figure out where things aren't happening. And to bring it full circle back to when do you fire a salesperson? My answer to this is always when you don't have an expectation that they are going to make the changes to their behavior that's required to hit your measurement expectations, right? So we talk to a lot of salespeople, and when we ask them, what's your plan for the next 30 days, they don't talk at all about increasing activity or changing the way that they're doing a certain activity. They don't talk about looking at what's wrong at stage 5 or 6 so that they're not moving ahead the way that the superstars are. They're not talking about learning from others in the organization to understand why 30% of their quotes are being rejected, but only 10% of somebody else's quotes being rejected. And when you get that, when you have somebody who's not taking those things into consideration, that's the person that you fire. That's the time to fire them, right? Try to train them, try to coach them. But if you've gone through that and done a good faith effort and they're still not able to change the way that they're working such that it matches up with the activities, the behaviors, and the processes that works with the rest of your team, then that's the time to let that person go.
Well, there it is. So listen, we've gone a little bit over the time here today. We're at 17 minutes, but still pretty tight, pretty concise. All those sales folks, again, this is an area we can learn from. We can all benefit from here. So as much as you were worried about this when we started, I hope you got some value from this. And certainly those that are operating and running these divisions or these teams, whether you're the CEO or the VP of sales, again, these are areas we can help you, especially if you don't have the right measurements in place. We can talk about what those measurements would look like for your company, how to apply them, how to measure them, how to hold your people accountable, and then, of course, the big question, when to fire them and how to do it. We hope you've got some tips here today. As always, you can check out the show anywhere you like. Get it on iTunes, Spotify. Feel free to share it with your colleagues, your peers, your coworkers. And of course, you can get in touch with Shawn and I at noahfleming.com. Hit the contact button and we will respond. Shawn, any closing comments from you?
I think that covers it for me, and I look forward to doing this again next week.
All right, folks, we'll talk to you next week. See you later.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to join us each and every week for another great episode of The Evergreen Show with your hosts, Noah Fleming and Shawn Veltman. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review, and we'll catch you next time on The Evergreen Show.